Please listen carefully.
Hi, I'm Paul Frields.
And I'm Dave Guzman.
And welcome to Practical Bass, where each week we pick a topic of interest to you, the working bass player, and we take it apart and look at it from a few different angles and hopefully explore some wisdom and some experiences that we've had and try and bring those together into advice that will help you take your gigs and your gear to the next level. We hope that you will not just listen to the podcast, but also share it with friends and also let us know what you think of the episodes and let us know what you think of the show. And for that matter, if you have topics that you'd like us to explore, we're always happy to hear from listeners. You can reach us in numerous ways through our website, practicalbass.com, or you can email us at podcast@practicalbass.com. And you can find us on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, Google+, Twitter, everywhere people are social. There, so are we. And I think for this episode, Dave, we're going to plunge right in. I think you had kind of a little story, a preamble, as it were.
A little, yeah. So this one actually came about out of a conversation with a listener.
Yeah.
And he and I were having a conversation about, he's a guitarist. He gigs pretty frequently, and he was talking about his frustration that he has with some bass players.
I'm happy. So he's a listener of ours, but he's not a bass player. He's mainly a guitar player.
He's a guitar player.
That's cool. I really like to hear that because, I think we've always intended the show. We do talk a bit about like certain bass tech and stuff, but we also cover some general things that are not bassy.
That are just around music in general.
Yeah, yeah.
And his, and he had a pretty strong suggestion, and he made a comment about how it's frustrating when he's playing with bassists that lack that feel, that groove.
Yeah.
Right. So he's and specifically he was telling a story about this Stevie Wonder fill.
Is this guy? Is he known? Is he known to one of us, Dave? Is he a guitar player now playing with me?
No.
Okay. Just
no.
getting that. I love the neck scratch.
Can you hear the neck scratch?
That was great. Things are getting a little heated in here.
This is special effects.
Foley.
No, but he brought up something to me that I thought it's important to me, and I don't think about it all the time. And as basis, obviously this is important, right? But it's the whole topic of the importance of groove and feel. He was bringing up more like specifically, I think what he was talking about was a feel of the swing, in a Stevie Wonder fill or whatever. But I think that that's just a tip of the iceberg when we talk about feel and groove. So this week's episode is about groove.
It's about groove. Okay, cool. Yeah. So just, kind of unpacking that a little bit. So what he was talking about then is there's something that he was expecting, like a feel basically from a player, and having it not be there. Like they didn't have that groove. Like they didn't feel like they were set in the music where they should.
It was a piece that was where he knew specifically that the bassist knew the notes.
Yeah.
The notes were there. They were all there. Every single one of the notes. And if you looked at online and you chart out, or you look at the notes and you read it note by note and all the spaces.
Yeah.
It's there, but it's not grooving with what everybody else is doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are these discrepancies that feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Or square.
Yeah.
And I think for me it's a whole, I know for myself, this is something that I pride in, and I know that you do as well, because it's one thing that I notice in your bass playing, where it's whatever we do with our, especially with covers or even if we're just in a, jamming or whatever, that there's at the end of the day, there's always groove. We're always fitting in, we're always doing something rhythmically that's bringing the song to another level.
Right.
That for me, that's an important piece. And it's definitely not a do you know the notes or do you know the groove battle. It's not like a theory versus groove, But I think the topic that we should explore really is just the importance of groove.
Yeah.
Because both are important.
Right.
You shouldn't, there's no doubt you should know your notes. You should know the theory.
Right. But groove is like, it's not an either or. It's like groove is a requirement.
Right.
You have to have that in order to be successful. Like you have to,
yes,
that is a skill that you have to learn.
Exactly.
And I think, one of the important things to note here is this is not, I do think that there are people who are born with more musical talent than other people.
Right.
I mean, just like individual people, I think.
Yep.
Some, may have it innately. Some people don't.
Right.
It's luck of the draw.
Yep.
Who knows what it is. It could be,
what you're brought up with, right? What you're exposed to. That's right.
It could be all of those things. All those things combined, right?
Yeah.
And maybe there's some spark that people carry with them, or it could be like an aha moment and they kind of like get it. And then other people maybe have a harder time trying to break into that. But I truly believe that it is a skill that can be learned. Like I don't think groove is something that it is impossible for people to learn how to do.
I agree.
You do have to practice. If it doesn't come naturally, you have to practice it.
Yeah.
But you can learn it.
Yes.
Right.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I totally.
So, interestingly, so I feel like it is a practical topic, but it's interesting like how this topic has kind of come around to be one of those topics that, I mean, we really are going to be talking about some musical concepts that we don't often cover here, right? Like we have usually done, very technical topics or, professionalism topics or organizational topics or habitual topics, things that are all like maybe to help people be better professionals, but not necessarily talking about how to be better players.
Yeah.
But this whole idea of groove, I think everybody's got a different take in how they break it down, like how they explain it to other people. And maybe it's our time to kind of take a shot at it.
Yeah.
Because I do feel like we're both fairly groove oriented players.
And it's funny if you look at like, if you were to Google, people explaining groove, the funny thing is half of the time they put pocket in there.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Which doesn't really, if you don't know what groove is, you're not going to find the pocket.
Nope.
This pocket's like one of those like feel terms.
Yeah.
So without using the word pocket, when you're if you were to explain groove to either a non-musician or someone who's brand new, how would you explain that?
Okay, so I actually, confessional, right? I actually wrote some notes for the show, and I really thought about this.
Oh, you prepared?
I tried, and I'm not sure I'm well prepared, but I prepared something. It's a dish best served cold, like revenge. But what I wrote down here is that it's a combination of instruments that are linked together in what they're doing, but it is not the quality. The quality is not playing everything precisely together. It's that you play together most of the time, but you also complement the other parts at times. So it's kind of like a weaving in and out of togetherness and not togetherness, but always in tempo, right?
Right.
Like you can't be not together in terms of like not hitting the beat on time.
Right.
And I will make an exception, right? There is a way that if you work very hard at, this is like another level of skill.
Yeah.
There is a way that you'll hear about people playing there is a behind the beat feel that you can do as a bass player, right? And as a guitar player, right, where the drums kind of set the pace and everybody plays like, I mean, it can be quite a bit. I mean, not a whole bar, but like the guy hits the one and then you're maybe a 16th behind it or a 32nd behind it. And if everybody in the band is on that tip, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, if this is completely not connecting with you as a listener, go buy every D'Angelo album right now. Yeah. If you haven't heard them, and you're a bass player, you're crazy in my book. I mean, okay, you're not crazy. We love you. You're a listener, but I'm telling you right now, and I think Dave, you'll back me up on this.
Oh,
if you want to hear this at work, go buy that. And like, I think Pino was like on his first album, right?
Yeah. And I just, I heard a conversation about one of those recordings from a drummer.
Yeah.
Who is not in the neo soul like arena.
Yeah.
But they brought him on. I think it was a drummer, maybe bassist. No, it was a drummer. And they were asking him to go back further. They were like almost like a half a beat. And the drummer did the best that he could.
Yeah.
And they actually mixed it. It's in the mixing.
Yeah.
And it's like all post-recording that they went in and they pulled it back even further.
Yeah.
Which is mind-blowing because it works. It's super groovy.
Yeah. Yeah, it totally does. I mean, but you know, live, like you can watch, like his band will do this.
Oh,
like,
they got it.
Do it live. It's unbelievable to watch. Like to be precisely behind by that much consistently is it's pretty incredible to feel it. And so I guess that is, I mean, so my point was about groove is that that may be an exception, right? Like, and it's done for style reasons, but for the most part, it's kind of a linking of instruments, and it's like a linking and an unlinking that happens where it's mostly linked together, and then sometimes it's not. Yeah, but you're always with each other in terms of like where you're going.
Yeah, you know that reminds me. I had a college professor who did like a kind of a percussion class or musics of the world or whatever. And he wrote this book, and it was about what he defined. This was in the mid-90s. He defined it as participatory discrepancies. Oh. It's these, like, as musicians, we get to this point where we can create these discrepancies purposefully.
Yeah.
Or sometimes not purposefully, but it's like two horns playing together. Yeah. Like, you know, in a lot of like Miles Davis albums, like just you have those like two horns playing something slowly together.
Yep.
And that creates something. And I think rhythmically that does, you know, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. I mean, it really is about, you know, it's exactly what you said. It's this, you know, you're kind of like, you're making things different, but you're doing it in very judgmental ways. Like, I'm going to do something a little different here, but you fit that into an overall strategy of being together.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
Almost like, I mean, I guess you could think of it like, it's kind of like complementing fashion wise or whatever. Like, okay, you've got this color, but then the thing that makes something look good fashionably is not that everything is the same color. It's that you complement the color in different ways, different shapes, you know, different textures, whatever.
Right. Right.
I don't know that much about fashion, but I will ask my niece whether she would agree with that. She is a fashion and merchandising major in college.
Merchandising.
Sorry. Yeah, the merch. She does the merch.
Yeah, and for me, it's very similar. It's just maybe in a different light, because I think groove is something we try to, like, you know, envision our own mind. And for me, it is always about a communication between the musicians that are playing.
Yeah.
In a way where you are stretching, but it's a communication and it's a dance between each other's notes.
Right.
It's like all the little things, all the small things that kind of happen.
Right.
Intentionally.
Yeah. Like the things where you can read a drummer and kind of like compliment the fill that they do.
Right.
And you do it at the moment that they do it.
Yes.
And you just like look at each other and you're like, that was good.
Yeah. That's, to me, that's where like, where it happens. And then you can, you know, and there's communication. It's a dance between different notes. And if the guitarist is pulling in, and the more people that are pulling into that, or the vocals are bouncing in and out of what's going on. Yeah. It's that whole, like, to me, it just becomes like a dance. And that not only the musicians, but, for me, it's like, this, like the symptom of it is that, if it's not bad, but the symptom is that you see the musicians and the listeners kind of fall into it. Yeah. That they're almost in a, you know, not necessarily in a trance, but in a dream state.
Yeah. Yeah.
where they're just falling into it.
Well, I mean, that's where the dancing comes from, right? I mean, when people can't stop moving their feet because, it connects with them.
That's right.
I mean, that's sort of the dream state
yes,
you're talking about.
Not
exactly. To get too mystical or anything.
No,
but yeah, it's like, it really is like there's a connection because we have this, like, there's a primal thing that does take over that we really, rhythm connects with people. And when you have groove, right, the groove comes out of the rhythm. And that's why I really think of it as like every instrument can be part of the groove, but if the bass and drums are not grooving, it doesn't really matter what else is going on. Like, if the drums and the guitar are the only people grooving, it's not going to work.
Yep.
If the drums and bass are grooving, the guitar can be like, oh, it's sometimes groovy, sometimes not. But I mean, things will more or less work.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is about the rhythm, and the low is like, that's where we get that response from.
So in that light, then, do you feel, not to like pitch one against the other, but do you feel that groove is more important to you over nailing like the notation, like the specific notes that you're covering or whatever you're doing?
Oh yeah. Almost always. And there are times where I will, be slavish about learning. I'm going to learn this song because, I've got to learn it for some gig or whatever.
Yeah.
And you learn certain parts because you're like, okay, well, this riff is like an iconic riff.
That's right.
If you don't play that, it's not going to work. Like, I think there's only so much liberty you could take with something like, say, Flashlight. You know what I mean?
Right.
And have it, I mean, I mean, you could play with it, but to an extent, like, that's mapped out because people, like, it's so perfect.
Yes.
What are you going to do that's going to be better than Flashlight? What are you going to do that's going to be better than that? That's going to really take it to the next, like, oh yeah, I'll take this to the next level.
Yeah.
Right. I'll show those guys.
Right.
Really?
Right.
Like,
then go write your own song.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Parliament, they could use some schooling apparently. Like, really? Nah. Sorry. But there's things like that. Like, there are some things that you want to nail, but on the other hand, there's also things where you can kind of like, there might be a stutter here, or a grace note or a ghost note that you have here or there that kind of gives it your own feel.
Yes.
In that moment, and that'll work too, right? So,
and that might be a reaction to something that the drummer's doing.
Yeah, like they might have like their own little 5% or 10% that they put in. And if you listen to that, you might pick up on, oh, well, if I vary my thing, maybe not exactly the same way, but I might find my thing that puts a little spice on it. That's sort of, my individual stamp for tonight.
Yeah. That complements what's going on, because it's still communication. Even when you're covering something so specifically, like, you still want to make sure there are those open lines of communication.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I feel I'm on the same page for sure. I mean, I think, I always think of it this way, like, you always have like these, as bassists, I think we find these little fills that we do.
Yeah.
That's like our room for freedom.
Right.
Those are our like little mini solos that we get.
Right.
And we practice these like in our closet or in our basement alone quietly. And then when we go out to a gig, like, we throw out these like
you
little
can pull
fills,
it in
like,
in the right moment or something.
And maybe you have like this amazing fill that's just like, like 75 notes in 2 bars. Right? And it's probably not a good idea. But really when it's not a good idea is when you can't come back.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where it's like, are there too many notes? Or are you so focused on exactly like the notation that you're forgetting the big picture that
it's like, number one, don't do it.
Number
two, if you do it, make sure you get back on the one.
You better be back on the one, man. You better be like reining it in and hard.
Yeah.
And I think it was like a lesson early on when I first started learning how to slap years ago, right?
Yeah.
Just like playing around, and a teacher told me, like, whatever you do, focus on the low note.
Yeah.
Like all that high stuff, it's cool, but think of them as like ghosts. Think of them as like complementary, but really like you're there to keep that bottom, like keep that thing, keep the machine rolling, keep the groove, I'm air quoting here, keep that groove going.
Yeah, that was a great tip, actually. That really is a great tip about like, it's all about, you still have to be the foundation.
Yeah.
And the more you're flying around doing these other things, the more that foundation is gone.
Right.
And, that people are dependent on that.
Yeah.
To be in that, in that sort of, that dream state, that
trying to make magic out of the song.
Yeah, that primal rhythmic thing. And
that's right.
And if you take it away for too long, it just, it's gone.
And meanwhile, like on the other side, like I feel like maybe it's that the older that I get, but which is another lesson that I got early on, which I remember a friend of mine who's a jazz guitarist, and I started to get a little fancy in my notes,
Yeah.
You get started, all of a sudden you get fancy real quick, right?
Yeah.
A lot of notes, really cluttery. And he was just like, you should just try to play one note and like play it every different way that you can inside the beat and just play with it, like be elastic about it, right? Like do different things with that one note. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so boring, right? But now, like one of the songs that I've been listening to, it's an older song. It's the Jacob Dylan, One Headlight.
Yeah.
Right. And mostly because I've been getting into the drummer of that, like that band. The drummer's just like crazy. But now I'm listening to the bassist who's just going,
right.
Just like,
right.
And it's all texture
it's
and
very
rhythm.
Solid. Like,
very solid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that gallop, like that is the signature of that song. Like if you start playing that, you can play it in a different key and people are going to remember, oh, this is that song.
Yes.
They still know it.
Yeah.
Right.
And it might sound boring because bassists, we have a job.
Yeah.
And you could look at it as boring, but really it's like super foundational.
There's also a freedom in it. There's a brilliant column. So the new Bass Player magazine just arrived today or yesterday. And Ed Friedland, he plays with like, I guess the Mavericks and, God knows how many other people.
Right.
He's like a big educator. He's played with everybody.
Yeah.
And he wrote this column about being like, the guy with no face, right? Or being no one. It's like being, like the kind of Game of Thrones, like, sort of you don't really have an identity sometimes on the gig. And like, you're just there to basically play like Root and Five in some of these gigs or whatever. And it's like, but he was saying there's a freedom and there's a beauty in connecting at that level and just playing that perfectly instead of, playing around and doing this and that, and like putting your stamp on it, like definitively not putting your stamp on it, definitively just being there to play that part in, grooving hard and not drawing attention to yourself, but instead making sure that it goes to the singer, right? Or whoever the front person is or whatever, and not distracting from that. There is a like a sanctity to that as well. It's not that you can't do something else. It's just that like that has its own special magic,
We have this place as musicians in general, right? Not just as bassists, but bassists, I think it's different because we automatically have that role. So it feels like we, at least for myself, let me not throw us all in there, but it feels a place where it's just like, oh, I want to make sure that I do this exactly as like, boom, like I'm nailing this. And like, maybe nobody hears, but I hear it. Other bassists will hear it, whatever. But where it gets for me, like it speaks exactly to that, where sometimes I'm in these, like this mental state where it's like, I'm going to do something so foundational.
Yeah.
And so like, as you say, like just kind of nameless,
right?
But just really like, I'm going to nail this on point.
Yeah.
And it's really fulfilling.
Yeah. Like I'm just going to pour concrete. That's what I'm going to do right now.
And it's definitely a selfless act.
Yeah.
But if you just turn it around as like, if it's important for you to be, selfish or, that you want to let your ego in, you can let your ego in there also.
Yeah.
Right. Like you can define that that's what's important for me.
Yeah.
And just crush that.
Yeah. Like
and everybody loves that in a band.
Yeah. Like you redefine the game at that point.
Yeah. Like
Have you ever been in a situation where like the groove was really the central thing and and it went sideways on you? Like, or you went sideways on it?
Oh, yeah, both. One of the first things I could remember where it came to light for me was back in my salsa days where it was either, I can't remember if it was a sub for me or I was watching somebody else subbing for somebody in another salsa band. Whatever the case was, it was a bassist who I could clearly tell that they didn't play that genre.
Yeah.
Very like well studied. They knew their their music.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Jazz musician probably. And it basically derailed everything that was going on. And the reason is because they were playing all the right notes.
Yeah.
But in salsa they call it like el cruce, which is that you've crossed the clave.
Yeah.
And they just call it like the cross.
Yeah.
It's like the death. And because it's a 2-3-3-2 rhythm and all this like technical stuff that you're not really supposed to think about, you just feel, but technically there is something going on. And once you play these notes that you're playing, and they're usually like, root, fifth, octave, right, back and forth like a bell. But if you play them straight, you're going to go right into that cruce mode.
Yeah.
And I saw it firsthand where I'm like, oh, that's how like rhythmically you can completely like, derail a situation where no one knows where they're at, where the listener can't even tell where's the start of the phrase.
Right.
And that's very exaggerated, but that's Latin music. I mean, Latin music kind of has that thing where it's like, if you press play in the middle of a salsa tune, it's possible you're not going to know where you're at rhythmically.
Yeah.
You'll be completely lost and disoriented.
It takes a while to find the one.
Yeah. But I also, I remember very clearly a moment where I was with this drummer who I'd been looking forward to playing music with him, and it was a new project. I didn't know anybody there, and out of nervousness, I guess I was overplaying.
Yeah.
Which is something that happens, right?
Yeah.
Where you just like, you don't know, and so I thought I would get, again, like fancy note.
Right.
One of my air quotes, fancy note.
Yeah.
And he pulled me aside after like the first little run through of music, and he wasn't very wordy, but he said, "Hey, maybe just less notes." And I looked at him like confused and maybe shattered somewhat, and he saw my look, and then he clarified and he said, "Play for the song."
Yeah.
And that was it. We're good friends now. But like that moment changed a lot for me because it just stayed in my head. And and it's a little bit of a different topic, but it was what he was looking for. He's a pocket drummer, and he was just looking for groove. He was
be in the pocket with me.
He was listening to be in the pocket with me, man. Like let's support these great musicians that are playing with us.
Yeah, and did that happen to you like pretty young? Like,
it happened to me, I would say about within the past, it was maybe 10 years ago or so. Yeah. Where I just started really
like
advancing.
17.
Yeah, like 17. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, 17. But it was a huge, and we get those moments that are super humbling, and make us think about what that is.
That literally almost that exact same thing happened to me. Well, I mean, analogous to it, right? I was in my first, I guess, quote, real, unquote, band. I actually, I got recruited by this band, and they were already doing gigs and so forth, and they were losing their bass player for a couple reasons, and somehow we got connected, and they asked me to join up. And, I went to the first rehearsal having, I did a blistering amount of homework. Like I learned all these songs. They had 30 original songs they did, plus a bunch of radio hits and stuff.
Oh, wow.
And so I learned all that stuff, showed up, and I felt really, really confident. And at this point I was like, I think I was 24. I think I was 23 or 24.
Okay.
I hadn't been playing that long, like maybe 5 or 6 years or something like that.
Yeah.
And so we got started. We launched in the first one. I started playing them, digging in, and I wouldn't say I was playing overly busy, But the music had kind of struck me as kind of this punky thing, and I was just like playing basically like those Machine Gun 8s or whatever.
Sure, you had the confidence, and you were putting everything out on the table. And
the drummer's like, stop. He's like, something's wrong. Let's start over again. And so he's like, I need to listen to what's going on and hear what's happening. Start over again.
Well, I know that moment.
We get like 10 bars in, and he's like, stop again. And I was like, oh God. I'm thinking to myself, there's no way they do this every rehearsal, right? Who's the variable here?
Yeah.
Right? He takes his drumstick, and he's literally like, he points it at me, he says, you hear this? And he points the drumstick downward at his foot. Goom, 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 goom,
right.
Goom, goom, or whatever the pattern was. And he's like, do that. Let's start again. And that was it. That was the lesson, right? And it was hilarious.
It's funny how our drummer stories are very similar.
Yeah. Well,
few of words. And
it's the great drummers like that. Playing with a great drummer is the biggest gift you can get as a bass player. And that's like that's lesson number one right there. Like that's evidence.
Yeah.
And so, from that moment on, always, that kick is my go-to. That's my go-to place. It doesn't mean that like you only have to play on the kick, but what it is like if you're not making the kick beats, if that's not your mantra in whatever you're doing, you're not grooving, right? Like it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean you have to land every single time the kick lands, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do anything else, but if that's not guiding what you're doing, you're off in la la land.
Yeah, because there's cool stuff that you can do with groove in term, like, we're not going to get overly like technical, but there's cool stuff that you can do with the hi-hat and other things that are going on that you can communicate with, but definitely the bass drum.
Right.
Like if you're listening and this is like a first time that you're going to be in a band or playing with other musicians as a bassist, definitely cue into the bass drum.
Yeah. And that's why, it's like, it's the signpost. And it's also why you like, how if you're a seasoned bass player and you're playing with a drummer who is not seasoned, like, I don't know, you end up with a jam or whatever, like, they want to play like all over the place. And what you want to be able to impart is the same thing. It's just keeping it simple is sometimes the most beautiful way to play drums. It's not the only way to play drums, but it is one very beautiful way to play drums when you're just trying to like get acquainted musically or whatever.
Right.
You have to be all over the place. And that too many notes thing is like, that's a thing that I hear bassists do. Like I see guys who've been playing for 30 or 35 years or whatever. And they're like every song they have to play basically every note on the fretboard. And I'm like, you're not like, everyone's not here to see you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you reel it back in.
and it's like, I will say, because I think back, many years ago where there were bassists that were older than me and had more experience and they were playing up and down the fretboard, right?
Yeah.
And I thought this was like in jam band time.
Yeah.
And they really were advanced, like from where I was, they were advanced.
Yeah.
So if you are listening to this and you're like, wow, I think I'm one of those guys that like runs up and down, at the end of the day, this is music, right? Like maybe this is your path. This is something you have to explore.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of like the bebop jazz guys are like burning notes, right? Like they're on fire and they're nailing it.
Right.
And then you see them when they get older and they just play slower, more intentional notes.
Yeah.
This might just be like where you are within your journey of music.
Right.
So there's no right or wrong.
No.
But like as a bassist, I think the consensus is like eventually you'll find yourself in that place where it's less about how many notes that you're playing and more about where those notes are placed, and about the space in between the notes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when we err, I think as we get wiser about what we do, we tend to err on the side of less is more.
Right.
And that's why you hear that so often from people, less is more. And it's not a thing about, well, less may be more if you can't play more. Well, that's not really the case, right? I mean, if you know how to play more, you still understand that like that space is what defines like, it can define, a groove or whatever.
which is something that I think we hear, like, we hear this as musicians, the whole journey through, you always hear less is more, or, it's maybe for the first time you're hearing like, okay, the space is, it's about the negative space, it's all that. And it took me a while as a musician to really understand what that is, but it's just, I think, a place, especially like when we're talking in relation to groove, you start to realize like, oh, like it's really funky when I'm like playing this note, like super staccato, this one maybe muted, this one's long, all this sets, during the chorus, these are nice and long and connected and sustained. And then I get to this part and then it's super tight and the drum does something different that's really like tight on the hi-hat, and it's like all this stuff is going on. And that's where, for me, like the space starts talking to me.
Yeah.
And I start thinking about it instead of the notes that I'm playing, I kind of think of the space is the notes that I'm playing.
Well, I'll play. So here's an example. So I pulled out a little drum loop today.
Yes.
And just did a quick example. Now there's nothing special about this riff. It's literally like just a simple, like just kind of a simple bluesy riff. I didn't want to get like too crazy, but keep it simple so people can hear the difference. You're going to hear basically like four bars of one style, and then it's going to switch up.
Mm-hmm.
The first 4 bars are going to be basically without much space. The riff is not bad. I mean, here, we'll play it, and it's going to be in time, but it's kind of, there's no space. It's basically all note, right? So, you hear that, like, it's not bad. It's with the kick. I mean, but it's all note, right? But then you listen to the switch.
Right. Yep.
And you feel that, like that makes me want to bob my head a little more.
Yep. Drastic.
There you go. There you go. Like that's an example, I think, of like what we're talking about notes in space.
Yes.
So
that was cool. That was a nice surprise.
Yeah, I did that today. I thought Dave is going to like this if I pull this out.
Paul's always trying to throw me off. I like that. Seeing if I can stay in the groove.
But you're right. I mean, it really is about the space. So one thing I want to ask you, because I know how I was going to answer this, but what do you think about metronomes? Like, how does this affect your groove skill? Like, how have you used a metronome? Have you? Is it good for it? Is it bad for it? What's worked for you?
Right, because so like my initial, like you would expect that a metronome would be really bad for groove, because in my mind, right, because it's so mechanical, and just so lifeless. Like it is just the hammering down.
It is what it is. Yeah,
it is what it is. Yeah. It's like, let me bring life into that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I've learned over time that, for me, practicing with a metronome really has helped me develop, my internal timing.
Yeah.
Right. Like my own timing, which is one aspect of it. So
you're going
like,
right to the secret. That's a good secret.
And sometimes it's like a muscle, and sometimes I lose it, and then I have to go back to practicing, more to a metronome to make sure that thing stays right in line, right? Like recalibrating that thing inside my head, that clock, which gives me the power, because now I know no matter what we're doing, I know really where that's supposed to be.
Yeah.
No matter what anybody else is doing, like maybe I won't stick to it because I'm going to go with other people, but at least I know where that's at.
Right.
But the other side of it is that if you're playing to a metronome and you're doing it in some sort of like swing or feel or some, whether it's drag or you're pushing intentionally and that's your practice, then you're learning how to fight that, or how to like dance with it or play with it or create that elasticity to that.
Right.
And then all you have to do is then when you're playing live with a drummer, if the drummer's solid especially, and whatever they're doing, then you can. That's your new metronome.
That's how you learn to find pocket.
Right.
We've avoided talking about pocket, but that's how you find it. Basically, if you if you can measure against an absolute tick, tick, tick in your brain, you can find the pocket with a good drummer.
Exactly.
I mean, just fall right into place.
Yeah. You practice with a metronome, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't do it as often as I probably should anymore, but I have there's two things. Like I used the metronome when I was starting out. It was absolutely important. But I mean, I grew up playing music in band.
Yeah.
And we used to, I used to practice scales and etudes and all these things to a metronome.
Yeah.
To learn how to get faster, more dexterity when I was playing woodwinds, right?
Yeah.
I had to learn how to, get my articulations going and then be able to do things quickly, because sometimes you had to do these runs that are like, and you had to you'll be able to get your fingerings going like that.
Yep.
So I practiced with a metronome and speed it up over time and whatnot. And so I came to bass kind of already having a bit of an internal metronome, but I still used it in order to learn the fretboard and play my scales and etudes and things like that.
Right.
The same way.
Yeah.
But I think there's two things about a metronome or two things metronomic. I think they're good. Number one, you're not stuck with just using a metronome anymore. Like that audio thing that we just stuck in, that's a robot drummer from from the computer.
Yep.
And it sounds plenty good enough to, I mean, it's a real drummer. It's a MIDI file that's good, that comes from a real drummer and a real drummer's feel. So there is a pocket to it. It's not just like a computer on a clock. You're getting someone's real feel.
Right.
And you can learn how to play against that pocket. You can try all these different feels. It's a great tool. But I would say, and those things are out there. They cost, the good ones are going to cost you some dough. If you don't have a lot to spend and all you can really get is like that $10 or $20 metronome, you are not up a creek, because what you can do, I think this is a great tool, is to generate that inner clock. Instead of having the metronome count off every beat, switch it to halftime, or so it's only counting half notes, or even one beat per measure, like gives you the one,
right?
And as you get better, you kind of take away more beats,
right?
And the other thing you can do is play around with what beat it hits,
right?
Like learning to play where the metronome hits on the 2 and the 4, or just the 2 or something like that, is just as useful, and it'll really that is what will really end up cementing your time, is making yourself do that work. Yeah.
And I think the having that freedom, because you're not using other musicians' time. It's just you and whatever device, mechanism, computer, whatever it is. And if you can get those things that you can toy around with, exploit it.
Yep.
And embarrass yourself. It's just you and the machine.
Yeah. No one's watching.
No one's watching.
That's what practice is for.
And the beauty is you can really start to play around with other things that I feel are important to groove, like ghost notes.
Yes.
Pulling notes out.
Yeah.
Pulling out, the third note where you normally wouldn't.
Right.
Throwing it back in, sustaining one note, not sustaining one note. And then you can do things where you have something like this, where you've got a drummer that's just doing some pocket groove.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be that technical. You could even just do YouTube.
Yep.
And you can YouTube drummers that are doing pockets for 8 minutes.
Yep.
And play with that and try a different one. Don't just get settled on that one. Try something, try a different style or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
And toy around with it and figure out how does my bass respond to these? Because it in every different situation, your bass responds completely different. It does something completely new and breathes a new amount of life into something just by sometimes pulling a note out, the emphasizing one note more, or giving it life as opposed to just the straight note or the survival mode where you're just going from one note to another.
Right, exactly.
Which is really a lot of that feel that comes into the groove piece.
Right. I mean, that brings us all right back, to what the whole motivator here was. It's not just about the notes, it's about putting some life into them. And, and that's what groove is all about, is it gives the notes a life.
Right.
That goes beyond the page or goes beyond just the note names.
Right. Exactly.
Well, what a great conversation, man. I'm really glad that we had this topic come in, and you have to thank our listener for us. And I guess that wraps it up for this week. We have had an interesting time talking about this, and I hope the listeners have enjoyed it too. Please let us know either way, good or bad. You can reach us at practicalbass.com, our website, or you can email us directly at podcast@practicalbass.com. If those don't work for you for some reason, you are welcome to reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Google+, Twitter. We also have an Instagram account. You can send us pictures of your practice session with your metronome grooving. I think that would be amazing if we got like a avalanche of photos of friends and fellow bass players kind of grooving it up. That would be pretty cool.
Grooving selfies.
Absolutely. Groove selfies. Yeah. And please make sure that you share this with your friends and associates, your bandmates, and also that you subscribe. Make sure you hit the subscribe link. It's very easy on any podcatching app out there, whether it's podcasts on your iPhone or iTunes on your Mac OS device, Google Play Music or Stitcher Radio on just about any platform, or really just about any podcatching app that's out there. You can search for Practical Bass and then hit the link to subscribe. You'll get a fresh episode delivered to you every week for free. And we look forward to hopefully spreading some more good news about bass to you in the next episode. So until then, I'm Paul Frields.
And I'm Dave Guzman.
This has been Practical Bass.
Thanks for listening. Welcome to Practical Bass, where we pick a topic and unwrap
that's completely boring to normal human beings.
But we undress it, pleasure it.
Now I'm not going to be able to do the intro. I'm going to be thinking of that the whole time now.
Welcome.
What have you done? You've just wrecked the whole weekend. Oh my God.